Okay, stop. Okay. Inshallah. All right, assalamu alaikum. I hope everyone had a good break. Alhamdulillah, the food was very good. Prior to getting into the logical fallacies that we'll be discussing in the Q&A session after that, we'll be talking about two more problems often faced by Muslims in regards to talking to non-Muslims. So some of the individuals in here requested that I talk about slavery. And I will talk about general slavery. First, I want to talk about sex slavery, the so-called accusation of sex slavery. Okay. Now, I'm only going to offer two forms of evidence in this regard in order to refute this accusation. I'm going to give you a comment from Imam Malik, okay, in his Muwatta, and I will give you a comment from Imam Shafi. Okay, that's it. And you can determine from their opinions. Some of the two greatest masters of our religion in terms of knowledge. You can determine from these answers whether or not sex slavery is allowed in some form or another. What we mean by sex slavery is that somebody is captured, okay, a woman is captured, and then you're allowed to have sex with her against her will. Okay, so she is your slave, so you can have sex with her anytime you want, even if she doesn't want to. In fact, this is not part of our religion. Yes, you can capture people, you can enslave them, we're going to talk about that later, but in terms of forcing yourself upon a woman, this is false. If we could see what Imam Malik says, can you raise up please? In our view, the man who rapes a woman, regardless of whether she is a virgin or not, if she is a free woman, he must pay a dowry like that of her peers. And if she is a slave, he must pay whatever has been detracted from her value. The punishment is to be carried out on the rapist, and there is no punishment for the woman who has been raped. Okay, so even if she's a slave, if she is raped, punishment shall be enacted on the rapist. Okay, this means that it's not allowed to rape a woman even if she's a slave. Okay, so you cannot force yourself onto a slave woman. All right, go down.
Just a monetary punishment, that's it.
Monetary?
Dowry?
What kind of punishment?
Well, let's see in a moment. Okay. And here's Imam Shafi who's giving a little bit more context. All right, he says, if a man acquires by force a slave girl, then has sexual intercourse with her after he acquires her by force, and if he is not excused by ignorance, then the slave girl will be taken from him. He is required to pay the fine, and he will receive the punishment of illegal sexual intercourse. He'll be punished for zina. Okay. Bahaqi, Volume 2 says, basically, then they captured a pretty bride. They liked her, so they captured her. Then they had sexual intercourse with her. When he completed his mission, he felt guilty and went to Khalid and told him about what he did. Khalid said, I permit you and made it lawful to you. This is Khalid. He said, no, not until you write a message to Omar. And Omar answered that he should be stoned for having forced himself upon a woman. Okay? He should be stoned. They captured a bride, okay, so they made her a slave, right? He assumed that this is my right hand possesses. He then had sexual intercourse with her, okay? And then Omar ordered for him to be stoned for this action, okay? He ordered for him to be stoned. Some more evidences if you want. Can we go a little bit further, please? A little further, okay. Okay, and there's just some more basic statements. But essentially, rape in general, regardless if it's a slave woman, regardless if it's a free woman, is wrong. You cannot force yourself upon us. Now, however, if you acquire a woman, all right, and she understands that she is your right hand possesses, as it is, and she agrees without any problems, then it's okay. Of course, this is also including the fact that you must provide for her, and you must take care of her, and you must fulfill her rights, etc., etc.
Not only that, the slave women which you have sex with, they have equivalent rights with your wife, and their children have equivalent rights with your legitimate children after you passed away.
In terms of their inheritance? Yes, in terms of their inheritance. There is a little bit of a difference between the official wife and the slave girl, but in terms of how they should be treated, yes, they should be treated fairly. They should be treated with respect, So, but there is a different status in regards to other legal issues. Like for instance, if the slave girl does something wrong, then the punishment will be halved on her, whereas if she's a free woman, it'll be full. So that's a little different. Yes, ma'am.
But I think the issue of slave girl marriage is addressed in the Surah An-Nisa. It's already there. In Surah An-Nisa.
Okay.
It's about slave girl.
Yeah.
The man married slave girl. You have to take care of the slave girl as your wife.
Yes, you treat them similarly. Yeah. The thing is that this is a very we consider this a very uncomfortable subject as well. Does Islam permit slavery? Does it disallow slavery? This is one thing. The issue is this: it allows slavery under certain limited conditions, and it promotes the freedom of slaves.
You see,
Okay.
it's like this. Before marriage, I'm talking about Arabia.
Yes.
Okay, marriage, women were wives were equivalent to camels. People will
Yeah.
boast that I have 100 camels, 500 sheep, and 20 wives. They were equivalent. What Islam did is change the concept of wives, liberated the ideology. So now wives are equivalent to men. They
Yes.
are better halves. So similarly, Islam liberated the ideology of slavery. You can be slaves, but you could be much better than an employee. I was a general manager in a shipping corporation, and I felt no better than a slave. So it doesn't mean you're a slave. I mean, Abu Bakr, for example, had an instance where someone came and said, "Hey, I thought that guy was your slave before." So he still is. He dressed better than you. He likes it. And they reached a stage where you can't even insult your slave. It has to be willing kind of a thing. It must be very much fair to the person.
Yes, and you also understand that we cannot even slap our slaves across the face. They can get their freedom as a result of that.
Correct. Rasulullah even made a law that if someone calls his slave, "Ya Abdi," "Oh my slave," he's freed. To that extent, not even slapping, even hurting ego in public was not allowed.
So yeah, there were many limitations that were placed on the practice of slavery itself. In fact, it was discouraged on many levels within the Quran and the Sunnah. It was considered that a good deed to free a slave as well, especially for expiation of certain sins. So in terms of how slavery is dealt with in the Quran and the Sunnah, it is not encouraged, but at the same time, it is not disallowed completely because it was trying to gradually, there is an opinion that it was gradually being abrogated. However, it still is allowed within the fiqh. But like I said, to a very, very limited degree. So in terms of how we view slavery from the Western context, which is you just take them, you treat them like cattle, and you beat them to death, and you treat them like they're just objects, this is not allowed in Islam at all. These people are still people. Their legal rights are different, but they still must be treated as human beings. They can't be treated like a dog, or a piece of furniture or something of this sort. So in that respect, when the concept of ownership in Islam is also limited compared to the Western context, and this actually shows a very sharp distinction between how our cultures or our religions view the topic of ownership or possession. In the Western context, the reason they get so appalled by the idea of people owning other people is because their concept of ownership is unlimited. Meaning they have no respect for what they own. The things that they possess have no rights. The land they possess, everything, they can do whatever they want with it. Okay? Whereas in Islam, even the things that we possess have rights. Our animals have rights. Okay? The land in which we farm has rights. The earth has rights. Okay? We can't just do what we want with it. All right? So, it is... this is not to say that the West doesn't have concept of rights for, like, say, animals, for instance, right? They say that you can't abuse dogs and cats in certain parts of the world. This is considered an offense. But compared to, other things, like, so they can still abuse those things and they're okay with it. But because the animal rights movement was very popular in the West, especially in the United States, now they're starting to include more punishments for people who abuse animals, et cetera, et cetera. So, but for Islam, this has been around for a long time. I mean, we've always recognized that animals and other things have rights. So when we say that we possess something, it doesn't mean that we possess it in total, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala possesses us in total, because we are slaves to Allah. So that means that we don't have absolute freedom. So whatever we possess, okay, whatever we possess, we don't have full control over. All right. So the concept of possession and ownership is a taboo in Western culture when it comes to human beings. However, I would argue that there's a lot of slavery, for instance, in the West. It just goes under different names. The prison system is pretty slave-like in the way that it's performed. You know, many times in Islam, when we captured people in warfare, we did so as a form of prison to protect ourselves and to make sure that, you know, that they were punished to some degree. But in the West, they just throw them in a cage. And there's even work prisons. They have work prisons where they make them do work for like 25 cents a day. So, I mean, that is slavery, essentially, but they don't call it that. You know, there are other forms of slavery in the West. Let's see, the minimum wage is quite low, but people are still working 40, 50, 60 hours. And of course, they have the choice to work. That's what they're claimed to, but they don't really. You know, if they don't work, then, you know, they'll starve to death. So there's other forms of coercion, okay? There's also something called debt slavery. I don't know if you've heard of this concept, debt slavery. Basically, people are in debt for most of their lives. They're enslaved to the banks, okay? And if they don't pay, then people take all their property away. They have rights over them in some respect. I would even go so far to say this, and this is a philosophical statement. Our children are in some form or another are slaves to some degree. I wouldn't say that they're completely slaves, but what I would say is that we own them. We possess our children, okay, to some degree. When I say my son or my daughter, I don't have any children, but if I say my, what am I saying? Saying that's, this is mine. I own this child. Now, we don't say ownership because it sounds very crude, but in a way we are implying that this isn't yours, this is mine, my son. We don't say that he's just an independent person, you know, they have to follow us. They have no rights to do whatever they want. Of course, and if we abuse them, the state takes them away. So we have limitations in that regard as well, right? So, but, you know, so the understanding of possession from the Western context is actually much more crude and much more, what I'd say, barbaric than our perception of possessions. So because in the Western context, possession means something that has no rights at all. You can destroy it whenever you feel like it. You can burn it, you can throw it around, beat it to death, you know, it doesn't matter. So in terms of slavery, I think that would cover that. I'd like to talk about hudud and then go straight into the fallacies because I don't think we have much time left. So if we can switch this off, can you go to the fallacies page, please? Thank you. Hudud laws. Okay, we were just talking about this earlier. I just want to mention some things. A lot of non-Muslims, especially Islamophobes, like to object to the punishments in Islam as being barbaric or too severe. Okay, so we're going to mention zina. The punishment for zina. Okay, if you're an unmarried person, it's lashes, correct? Lashes. And if you are married, it's stoning. Okay?
Stoned to death, huh?
Yes, stoned to death. When people hear about this, they cringe a little bit. They're like, oh, you know, even Muslims, we're kind of like,
That's good.
that sounds very bad, right? But in fact, in actuality, it is a deterrent, all right? It's very difficult to prove, and it requires 4 witnesses. Now, does the act of zina itself, is that what makes the punishment possible? Can anybody answer me the question? Does the act of zina itself, is that what makes the punishment? No. That's the mistake that people often make when they understand zina. It's not zina itself that's the reason it's being punished. It's because it's a public act that's being punished. Why? Because you need 4 witnesses, right, to see the act. Not video recording, nothing like this. It needs to be 4 witnesses who have the exact same testimony. And if they're wrong, if one of them is wrong, then the whole team is considered wrong, and then they get lashed for making slander, okay? And then their testimony is never accepted after that, all right? So that's how difficult it is, for one. In order for that many people to catch you in the act, you have to be doing it like in KL Central, in the middle of everyone, to even the possibility for you to be caught, okay? So the reason it's punished is because it's made into a public offense, not simply because somebody, this is still bad, sleeps with somebody else unlawfully, but because you had the audacity to do it in such a way that it becomes publicly witnessed, okay? That is the crime.
It's a public shame, huh?
It's basically a public shame. It's a public act of indecency to such an extent that it must be punished in such a harsh way. Because remember, there are two things that make sure that this act cannot be caught in private, okay? And I'm not encouraging anyone to go do anything. I'm just telling you that Sharia limits the possibility of being caught in private by two reasons. One, you cannot spy. We are not allowed to spy at all. So these incidents where we find political ministers being caught for zina because of the cameras being placed in their hotel rooms, this is haram. This is absolutely haram. We cannot be doing this, trying to catch people doing zina, because now we've made it a bigger problem. Now we've showed it to the whole world. Okay?
Is there Quran verse on this?
Yeah, you're not supposed to spy. Yes, yes it is. Yes. So, and the other one, I just forgot. So, is you cannot spy. That's the first one. And secondly, you're not allowed to enter anyone's property without permission. Not allowed to enter anyone's property without permission. So if you decide you're going to do something bad and commit zina, it is virtually impossible for anyone to catch you if you're doing it in the privacy of your own home. Even if they video record you, you can't be punished for it because you can't spy, right? So, in fact, the act itself is not what is punished. It's the fact that you had the nerve to do it outside of the private context and get caught by 4 people. I mean, this is insane. This is somebody who has absolutely no shame. Okay, and the rarity of it being punished is because the people who often were stoned for the act of zina, at least in the past, now is a different story, especially in places like Iraq, is because they went to the authorities themselves and they confessed to having done it. And they wanted to be stoned to release themselves of their sins, okay, to repent. So that was the reason. So that's how difficult it was. Now I ask you, is it really barbaric to have such a harsh punishment for somebody who would be brave enough, not brave enough, stupid enough, to throw themselves in public and commit such an indecent act? This person is, and I say this, try not to be so harsh, this person is no better than an animal. If they're willing to have sex with somebody else, in a public sort of area. This is somebody who's very...
You know what answer we will give you.
Okay.
I want to ask you, if you ask this question with American students,
okay,
those who are a bit open-minded in some of the open metropolitan cities, what would be the response?
What would be the response? If you caught them having...
No. If you ask this question with American students,
okay,
college students and all that,
they would say that this act should not be punished in such a way. And that's because the open indecency of sexual activity is accepted as the norm within society. Pornography, for instance, is very accepted. Okay, so they accept it as a moral thing.
they accept it as?
Is something that's or amoral or something that is okay to do. Now, in terms of adultery, in terms of like cheating on your wife or cheating on your husband, this is considered bad in every culture. However, the way they treat it is also depends on a few things. Like for instance, do you remember what happened with Tiger Woods? He had like 17 mistresses and he confessed to it, Okay, well, for the first 3 months, all the women were saying he's a pig. He's a horrible person for doing this, okay? And everyone was saying bad things about him. And most of the men were saying, oh, very good, and within that culture, okay? Not all of them, but many people. And then, after 3 months, nobody talked about it anymore.
Even for some counseling and some rehabilitation.
Yeah, but nobody cares anymore. If you talk about Tiger Woods today, nobody mentions it. He's still playing golf. He's fine. He's still married to his wife. She took half his assets, but besides that, he's still married to her. she's still married. I don't know why she's still married, because he has a lot of money, right? But see, the cultural, it's not really a cultural taboo. But of course, if somebody cheated on, if they were cheated on, then we see a different story. In fact, there are many instances in the West, especially in the United States, where a man catches his wife in the act and he goes to jail for it, for murder. But in the court system in the United States, we have something called crime of passion. Okay, a crime of passion. And it puts a limiter on the amount of punishment time he gets. Okay, he shouldn't have killed the person, they say, but at the same time, we understand why you did it, because you were angry that your wife was sleeping with somebody, else. And they also excuse women. There was an incident in the United States, and I think even in China recently, where a woman cut her husband's for cheating, and she didn't get any jail time for anything, and that. And nobody, and even if you look at the news online, you read the comments, all the women are like, yeah, they're like, this is awesome, and then they have the audacity to claim that, that what we're doing is barbaric as well, for such indecent acts that are done in public, okay? And this is what they're doing in private, all right? And they're getting punished for it, and yet for some reason there is no outcry. There's no, whenever people ask for somebody to be punished. In India recently, I read a news report that a child rapist was caught by the community that he lived in. They beat him to death in the street. And if you read all the comments from all the Westerners, they're like, oh, he deserved it. He deserved it. So it's really fascinating. It really depends on sort of what they value and who they value when they make these sort of judgments of whether or not something is barbaric. Okay, and I'm going to give you some other reasons why we should not take people seriously when they mention these things. But first I want to go into another hadud punishment, which is the had when we cut the hand off. Okay, it's for only a certain amount. Okay, the person has to be caught within a certain amount of time. All right, basically if they haven't made repentance within about 48 hours, okay, then they haven't returned the object or returned the monetary value of whatever they have stolen, and then we catch them after a certain period of time, then the punishment can be applied. So basically there's a forgiveness period, okay? It can't be for any other reason. Like, it has to be for like a ridiculous reason that they stole this. It can't be because they're starving or because of anything else. Whereas in the United States, if you steal, regardless if you're starving or not, you're going to jail. Doesn't matter what your reasons are. That's why you have a lot of African Americans in prison, a lot of poor African Americans in prison, 70% of the population, because even though they're poor and they're stealing and selling drugs and things because they're trying to survive, they're still punished regardless of this. But what we do is that if the theft is so heinous and he's caught, or the person is caught, we cut the hand off, okay, which serves as a deterrent, and we send them back into society. Now, I mentioned this yesterday. Is it better to have one severe punishment where the individual is then reintroduced into society and no longer does the crime, and he serves as an example unto others? Okay, is that bad? Yes, he's dismembered. Okay, we understand that, but he can still survive, he can still eat, he can still communicate with people, he can still live a normal life, most likely. Okay, whereas the person who goes to jail for 20 years is stuck in a prison cell outside of normal community, away from his family, not doing any work whatsoever, not being productive whatsoever, okay, being paid by other people's tax dollars to stay inside a cage, and basically being tortured physically and socially, and is around other criminals. Can we describe any worse treatment, in my opinion? I think that a swift, severe act of punishment is far better and far more effective than putting people behind cages for years for these sort of crimes. And I find it very interesting, and this is more of a philosophical point, is why, especially Americans and Europeans, why are they so, they find what Muslims do in terms of our legal system is so unconscionable, meaning so severe, so barbaric, quote unquote, when in fact, they endorse certain laws themselves that would be considered barbaric by their own standards. Such as how their governments, and I'm talking not domestically, I'm talking foreign-wise, how their governments treat other societies, for instance. Their perception of collateral damage, or why the United States cannot be punished for having killed 80% of a population that had nothing to do with, so basically killing the majority of civilians. Usually this would be considered a war crime under any rational, moral society standards. But when the United States or Europe uses precision bombs to kill 1 or 2 people and ends up killing 20 or 30 instead, nobody questions that. They say, well, that's war. It's not a big deal. I'll tell you the reason why when people look on the news and they see Muslims chopping heads off and chopping hands and things, they say, this is barbaric. But when they don't do it when their president drone strikes some children in Pakistan or slaughters thousands of people in the Iraq War. It's because of the visual representation. It's not there. When they do something wrong, they don't show it. They tell you about it. They say, oh, we drone strike somebody today, but they don't show the dismembered bodies. They don't show how the bomb dropped on them and blew them to pieces. They don't show these things. But when they show Muslims doing something, they show the exact act from point A to point Z. They show it in slow motion sometimes. They do it like when the blood's coming out, it's like in slow motion, so they make all the details. They increase the volume when somebody's screaming on the audio. You don't notice that? Anybody notice that? When you see a beheading, the audio goes up when the act starts to happen. I don't know if you notice, it's very subtle. They raise the volume really quickly when the soldiers start screaming, so you hear it very clearly. Okay? Even if recently there was a woman who was executed in Saudi Arabia. She was Burmese because she raped her husband's daughter with a broomstick and killed her. I'm not joking. That was the crime. So they executed her in public. So they took a video recording. They showed them doing the execution, right? They cut the woman's head off. And as they're coming down with the sword, you hear very faint noises in the distance, right? But as the sword comes down and it cuts, its scream sounds like it's like right in your ear. They increase the volume like right there, boom. And say, oh, see the horrible act, see what's going on, right? And then all the people underneath the comment section, they're saying how barbaric Muslims are. Even though this woman just raped a child and killed her, she was being executed for that reason. But they say, look how barbaric. But then, if somebody gets killed in India for raping a child, everyone's okay. Now you wonder, why is there such a difference? Does it have to do with maybe media portrayals? Does it have to do with the saturation? I call this information saturation or media saturation. Basically what they do is they saturate your mind with certain images that you're used to. Okay, and then you start to develop negative portrayals of people automatically, regardless of what the reasons may be. So if a Muslim kills somebody, people automatically think there's something wrong with that person for having killed. If he killed somebody, it must be for a bad reason. But if somebody else kills somebody, okay, why? And then they start questioning. Oh, well, why did this happen? Well, maybe it was for a good reason. Maybe it was something like this. So oftentimes we see that people in the West will commit similar crimes, or people that the West doesn't hate will commit similar crimes, and Westerners will be okay with it, that person is punished in what we consider an unfair fashion, or what they would consider unfair fashion. Sometimes they're okay with it. But when Muslims do something by their own legal standards, then we're considered barbaric as a result of that. But probably the best argument to use against people who are against hudud is this. Even if they believe it's barbaric or not, even if they believe it's barbaric, say you can't convince them that it's not barbaric, we have something called social contract. And this is a philosophical position that I want you to understand. It's called social contract. And this was developed during the time of John Locke. Okay, he was a famous philosopher who encouraged democratic values and things like this. He was used as a template for the American Revolution and American Constitution. Okay, his name was John Locke. Now what he believed is that when people get together and they decide upon their laws, they have a right to practice those laws amongst themselves. Okay,
social contract.
Social contract. If they want a punishment for themselves, if everyone agrees to this, then they should be allowed to punish themselves how they wish. Okay? Because they've all decided on it.
Tribal law.
So, well, if Muslims, for instance, if in Egypt are 98% of them or something, say they want Sharia, they should be allowed to implement it among themselves. That's what it should be. But you see, Westerners don't think that way. They think that social contract only applies to themselves. Okay, they believe that it only applies within their type of societies and their values. But if Muslims want to get together and form a government, like a caliphate, or they want to form a government that implements the Sharia to its fullest extent, we can't allow that, so we have to bomb them. Okay. So I would find it more barbaric, actually, that Western standards are being imposed upon Muslims who don't want those standards and want to be punished among themselves as they wish. Has anybody ever asked some of these women who were stoned whether they agree with the stoning? No. Has anybody ever asked some of the people who get their hands cut off if before they got caught, they agreed with this punishment? Anybody? Of course, nobody loves to be punished. Nobody wants to be punished, regardless of what the punishment is. But that's not an argument. Did that person agree with these principles before they got punished? For instance, if I am a Muslim, alhamdulillah, and I'm walking into, and I understand what the punishment for theft is, and I agree because it's in the Quran and the Sunnah, but I want to steal anyway, and I think I can get away with it, all right? I've already agreed that this is the right punishment, all right? And so if it happens to me, then is it unjust when I've already said it's okay? Is it unjust to punish me in a way that I've already agreed to? So it's not, right? But no Westerner asks this question when they ask about the people being punished. Do the people themselves agree with the punishment? And the reason I bring this up is because of this. When I bring up this argument, somebody asked me, would you want to be stoned? Do you want to be stoned? Of course I don't want to be stoned. They said, so see, you disagree. I said, no, I just don't want to be stoned. It has nothing to do with me agreeing or not.
It was a loaded question.
It's a loaded question.
Once, I think a Malaysian politician said, we don't want to implement hudud because all the Malays will be working with one hand later on. So it's as if like saying, does it mean all of us are thieves?
Besides that, but I mean, that's more of a exaggerated generalization, and it's a faulty thing to say, because if everyone is stealing, then there's something wrong with the society. You shouldn't be implementing it anyway. But that's besides the point. But what I want to say is that just because you don't like the punishment, like you don't want to be punished, doesn't mean that the punishment is wrong. Because there are people all over the world who don't want to be punished by their own laws. Nobody wants to go to prison. But that doesn't mean that prison's okay. Prison's not okay, for instance. I would use the same argument against the Westerners who often bring this up, the non-Muslims. They say, if you don't want to be stoned, that means you disagree. You don't want to implement it. And I said, do you want to go to jail? They said, no, then you're against prison. So that means what then? So you disagree with your own laws? They said, no, I agree with my own laws. So then, so do I. So what's your point? And we call this an appeal to emotion. This is also a fallacy. Appeal to emotion, where you try to use people's emotions to prove a point. Oh, this makes you feel bad? That must mean it's wrong. No, that doesn't mean it's wrong. Okay? So the understanding of barbarism, even if they think it's barbaric, my main problem is whether or not they want Muslims to not be able to do it or not. See, I could care less if the kuffar think we're barbaric, to be honest. I really could care less. My main concern is whether they want to drop bombs on us because we want to practice it. That's my biggest concern. And to me, that's more barbaric, than what we're trying to implement, because at least we've agreed upon it, that we want this for ourselves. If I tell you I want to be lashed for committing some form of offense, okay, if I've already agreed to that punishment, then it's not unjust if it's being put on me, because I've agreed to it. If the Western non-Muslims can sit here and say it's okay to kill yourself, it's not against the law, you can do with what your own body as you want, then why is it that we cannot choose how we wish to be punished? So it's okay for them. It's okay, it's not against the law to kill yourself in many countries in the world, many Western countries. It's okay to mutilate yourself. It's okay to do whatever you want with your body. They even say it's okay to have abortion because it's her body. You can do whatever you want with it, right? Because you own your body. But if I want to be punished a certain way, I can't do that. That's hypocrisy. It's a contradiction in their ideals. So as long as I kill myself, they're okay with it. But if I want to lash myself, it's a problem. You know.
It seems to me that they are, have these particular values, and they think that their values is, better, and they want to impose it on us. Where do this superiority thinking creep in?
Superiority thinking came in with a lot of the ideas that I mentioned earlier, actually, with their scientific advancement, technology, what they consider to be freedom. But there's a lot of things that they have in mind which they contradict themselves on many levels. And it's really a superiority complex entrenched in a form of, well, I could say racism. There is a high level of racism within these sort of societies, whether they want to see it or not. So for instance, we look at free speech. What happened in France recently? What happened in France? Charlie Hebdo, correct? So some Muslims went in and killed 12 people, and including some more later in the Jewish market, and because of the depictions of the Prophet, right? Or they were, right? Huh?
And they left all the evidence.
They left all the evidence there. There's other things we could talk about, but that's besides the point. My main point in this is that after that, the French, they all got upset and they said, look, freedom of speech, okay? We stand for absolute freedom of speech, absolutely. Okay, we can say whatever we want, whenever we want.
But not Holocaust?
But not the Holocaust, yes. But then something else happened after that, 3 days later. And this is really funny. There was a comedian, and I can't pronounce his name for love, it's Duendu or something, I don't know. Anyways, he said a comment on his Facebook. He said, I feel like, was it Charlie, he mentioned the name of one of the killers. And what he was trying to get at, he was saying is that I feel like I have free speech, but at the same time I'm treated like a bad person. That was his intention behind the statement. He explained it later. But they claim that he was endorsing terrorism. They arrested him the next day. Okay? Also, France has strict laws against anti-Semitism. The same magazine, the same newspaper that published the Prophet Muhammad's cartoons, right? They fired one of their editors for drawing an anti-Semitic or making anti-Semitic comments, okay, within the same, right? You also cannot deny the Holocaust. I wouldn't deny the Holocaust, but it's still, we're talking about free speech, right? Okay. There are also many laws in the West, including the United States, against slander and libel. You're not allowed to say lies about people that would hurt their reputation. Okay, you can be punished for that, right? So there's no absolute freedom of speech there. So, in many ways, they like to look at the Muslim world, and when our sensibilities, our things get offensive, or we feel offended, or when the sacredness of our beliefs is destroyed, okay, or our Prophet ﷺ is slandered, we can't get angry. So, it's really difficult to take many people seriously when they claim that certain things are barbaric in our faith, but at the same time they endorse things that are far worse. So I'm not saying that they're wrong for being hypocrites, but I'm saying that they have no right to speak. When they themselves consider acts that are 10 times worse than what we do in our countries, they consider those to be moral and justified. So I would usually turn it around on the person when they start to question us about how we punish people. Has anybody asked how the United States punishes people? What happened to Iraq before the war? Anybody know? The sanctions? Do you know what those sanctions did to those? 500,000 children died. Children alone because of sanctions, because of political disagreement. Iraq was never a threat to anyone. I mean, they didn't deserve. So 500,000 children had to be killed? For what? And then they blame Saddam Hussein. They say, oh, because he didn't give in to our demands. So it's okay to, so he said it's his fault that 500,000 children died. Really? Did he ask you to put sanctions on him? Does Iran ask for those sanctions as well? I mean, whatever you want to disagree with Iran or not, okay? Do they deserve what they're getting? I mean, do they really deserve that? When Russia invades Ukraine, it's bad. But when the United States invades and bombs 14 Muslim countries in the past 20 years, it's okay. So, that's fine. So there are a lot of double standards. It's based on power politics. Okay. That's why everyone in the UN disagrees with what Israel does to the people in Gaza. But the United States always vetoes it. Every single time. Every single time. Even when it's just Israel and the United States agreeing with this one thing and everyone else is against them, they veto. They veto, they veto, they veto. So there is a superiority complex. I would say that I have had many arguments with people like this, and the first thing that I like to do is I like to point out the things that they endorse. And I don't do it because I want to prove that my argument is right, because we're going to get into one of the fallacies. It's called tu kokui, okay? It means pointing the finger. It means that you're wrong because you're a hypocrite. But see, that's actually a fallacy. You can't say that that person's wrong because they're a hypocrite. They're a hypocrite, they're a hypocrite. But they're not wrong because they're a hypocrite. Okay, somebody could say 1 + 1 is 2, and they're still right, even though they're a hypocrite about something, it doesn't matter. So they could say that something is wrong morally and still be a hypocrite. If I say murder is wrong, but I murder somebody, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden I'm wrong about murder. It just means that I'm a hypocrite. That's it. So we have to understand that that's also a fallacy. So if we can go on, we're going to the fallacies now. I've been ranting, I'm sorry. So I'm going to just go through a few of them, okay? So we're going to mention the first one is called the ad hominem. I'm not going to go through this whole list. It's like 200. Okay, so this is the ad hominem. What is an ad hominem? Actually, no. Sorry. A personal insult. People often think it's a personal insult. An ad hominem is this. It means that you're wrong because of what I'm saying insultingly about you. Like, okay, so this is how an ad hominem would be. Okay, you're wrong because you're an idiot. That's an ad hominem. That's it. It's just an insult used as a way to say that somebody is wrong. Okay, you smell bad, so you have to be wrong. You're too fat, you have to be wrong. Something like this, something that's personal about the person, and they use that as an excuse, or not an excuse, as a way of saying that that person's wrong about their argument. And actually you hear this quite a lot, especially online. You see people saying just insulting things. They say, oh, this person is an idiot, so they must be wrong. That's it. So that's what we call an ad hominem. That's one of the most common fallacies. Okay. If we can keep going, please. Stop. Ad ignorantium. Ad ignorantium. We also call this the fallacy from ignorance. This is how it works. I don't know, therefore it's wrong. Or I don't know, therefore it's right. I know that sounds ridiculous, but let me give you this. We don't know God exists, therefore he must not exist. And actually, you might see some atheists sometimes saying this, actually. Okay? Keep going. Stop. Appeal to authority. Can we click on that one? The appeal to authority. This one is actually very much misunderstood, but it's a very good one to know, okay? And many people make the accusation, make this fallacious accusation all the time. They say people are appealing to authority and it's wrong, but they use it wrongly, and I'll explain how it works. Okay, so when you do the appeal to authority fallacy, it's when you claim that because an authority said it, it must be correct or it must be wrong. So for instance, if I make a citation of a doctor in regards to a medical issue, okay, I'm citing him as an authority, right? Right, is this okay though? Because he's a doctor. So say he's a medical doctor. So it would be okay for me to cite him as a reference if I don't know the subject? So for instance, I would cite a faqih for a fiqh opinion, right? Is that okay? Because he's an expert. Now what if I were to say that, okay, there's something wrong with your engine in your car because the medical doctor says this. That's the appeal to authority. That's when it becomes a fallacy, is when the authority in question is not an authority, but you use him as a source anyway. That's when it becomes a problem. And you'll see this all the time. For instance, atheists will always reference scientists talking about God, okay, when they have no qualifications in philosophy or theology or anything. Okay, this happens all the time. In fact, even happens among us. Some people will cite politicians, for instance, when they have no clue what they're talking about. So, which is usually like 90% of the time. But so if I said something ridiculous like, you know, I don't know, the theory of gravity is true because the president said so. Okay, that would be like an appeal to authority. That would be ridiculous, right? So that's when it becomes a problem. But it's never a problem to cite references who are actually authorities on the subject. It's not a problem. Okay, so can we go back? Sorry. Okay, there's a lot of these things. Appeal to emotions. We already discussed that one. Okay, it makes you feel bad, so it must be wrong, or it makes you feel happy, so it must be correct. Okay.
How many are there?
There's about there's more than this. This is about 200. I think there's roughly near 400 or 500 fallacies.
So what are these terminologies? What are these?
These are official terminologies in regards to what a fallacy is. And yes, human beings can be this unreasonable. That's why we have so many. So there's a lot of people who've made a lot of really bad arguments. Keep going. Appeal to past practice, appeal to tradition. That's what the Quraysh were using when they were trying to back their opinions about their religion. They said, we're following our fathers. Okay, so that's actually a fallacy of reasoning. Okay. Appeal to the mob. Can we click on that? This is also called appeal to popularity. You hear this a lot. A lot. And it's called statistics.
Appeal to the people, is it?
Yeah, or appeal to popularity.
Appeal to masses.
Okay, my idea is right because everyone else agrees with me. Because the majority of people agree with what I say. So it must be correct. This is called democracy. Okay, so, I'm kidding, all right, but that was just a slight joke. But, okay, so this is actually a fallacy of reasoning. So just because the majority of people believe something doesn't mean it's true. Now you could say to me in response, well, what about my ideas about the fitrah? Uh-oh. Am I making an appeal to popularity because most people have the fitrah, have this conception of God in their mind? Am I saying it's rational because of it? No. I'm not necessarily saying that. I'm not saying that it's true. I never claimed in this whole entire talk that the belief in God is true because of the number of people. I have claimed that it's more rational as a result of being, you know, something that normatively everyone shares. It's more rational. It's a rational starting point. So it's rational to have that belief. Okay, and I even have an argument. Of course, I backed it up by proving the other side wrong, right? But I never claimed that the belief in God is true because of that. So it's not a fallacy, actually. But I've been accused of making it before. So can we get on this? Yeah, go back. Go up. Appeal to unqualified authority is the same thing. Argument from ignorance is ad ignorantium. We just discussed that. Okay. Bandwagon is also considered the argument from popularity. Can we go to begging the question? Begging the question. Begging the question is when you include in your conclusion a premise, the premise and the conclusion at the same time. When you're trying to argue for something, you include the conclusion within your argument already before you come to the conclusion. So let's read the sentence. Women have rights, said the Bullfighters Association president, but women shouldn't fight bulls because a bullfighter is and should be a man. Okay. Why shouldn't women fight bulls? What's the argument? Because a bull...
It's a bullshit.
Because a bullfighter is a man, right? But he's putting the conclusion in the argument. So there's no justification. He's just saying it. So it's just an assertion, right? This is what we call begging the question. So that's why is it called begging the question? Because it begs the question as to why you think this.
Any other example?
Another example? Let me give you, here we go. Oh, okay, hold on. The argument is contained in the premise, the conclusion is contained in the argument, because women shouldn't fight bulls. It's, okay, for instance, the Bible. don't know if you've heard this argument before. The Bible is the Word of God. Why? Because God inspired the Bible. That's begging the question. Do you see the problem? Or even saying the Quran. The Quran is the Word of Allah. Why? Because Allah said that the Quran was the Word of Allah. That's begging the question. It's when you put the conclusion in the argument itself. And many people actually make this argument unknowingly sometimes. So, can we go back, please? Okay. Stop. Can we go to cherry picking the evidence, please? This is also called the fallacy of suppressed evidence. I've discussed this on several times. Where is cherry picking? Oh, why'd it go there? Can we go? Oh, okay. Can we click on that one? Thank you. Okay. All right, so suppressed evidence, intentionally failing to use information suspected of being relevant and significant is committing the fallacy of suppressed evidence. This fallacy usually occurs when the information counts against one's own conclusions. So say you're reading an article, okay, you're trying to prove one of those atheists wrong, right? And you go researching, and you find an article that's against you, and you just conveniently ignore it, okay, when you're presenting your argument next time. This will be called the fallacy of suppressed evidence. We should not do that. Even when the conclusion seems to count against us, we should try to be as fair as possible in revealing what actually is the case. Okay, we should object to the arguments and the evidence that we have at hand. All right, and we should use it when it's available. But many people don't. So for instance, remember those Quran passages that were listed and the one that was conveniently left out? Okay, that's selective attention or cherry picking or what we call suppressed evidence. And this occurs a lot of times. In order to find out if it's happening, all you need to do is do some research. If you find that there's evidence contrary to the person's conclusions, you can list it and say, look, your argument is invalid because you forgot to account for this information. And that's all you need to do. So we go back, please. Twice, back twice. Okay, go up. Okay, confirmation, stop. Confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is very similar to suppressed evidence, but it's a different way of bringing about an argument. So confirmation bias is when you're selective of the evidence as well, but it's more of an intentional act in which you only select evidence that confirms your agenda already. So it's also similar to what we saw in the Quran. I don't know their intentions, but I'm pretty sure they left it out on purpose because, you know, it seems a little bit too convenient that the ayah right before the one that you're reading, you can't include.
So they left out the context
Yeah.
of the situation.
So this one is more deliberate.
Like Surah Tawbah number 5. like how they do to Surah Tawbah number 5.
Okay, yes, yeah.
Fine.
Exactly. They deliberately leave out that context. So this is confirmation bias. In this statement, we can see of an example of it. She loves me, and there are so many ways that she has shown it. When we signed the divorce papers in her lawyer's office, okay, she wore my favorite color, all right? When she slapped me at the bar and called me a handsome pig, she used the word handsome, okay, when she didn't have to. When I called her and she said never to call her again, she first asked me how I was doing and whether my life had changed. When I suggested that we should have children in order to keep our marriage together, she laughed. So you see how he's interpreting all these negative situations. He's trying to find the good things in there to confirm what he already wants to believe. See? Okay, so can we go back? Okay, up. Distraction. Can we go to distraction, please? Okay, no, go back. Sorry.
Man, you memorized all this?
Yeah. Genetic. Can we go to genetic fallacy, please? Okay, I've discussed this earlier. Okay, genetic fallacy is like this. We say that something is untrue because of where it came from. This is a problem. So, for instance, if Hitler, everyone here knows who Hitler was, right? Okay, he killed a lot of people. So if Hitler said 1 + 1 = 2, and I say, no, he's wrong because he's Hitler, right? Or if he told me that you shouldn't murder people, but then I go, he's wrong because he's Hitler. That would be a genetic fallacy. Okay, so you claim that because the thing in question is a bad reference without any justification other than the fact that you don't like that person or something, that means that it's called a genetic fallacy. Okay? It's a kind of ad hominem. It's very similar to insult. It's like saying you're wrong because you're stupid. Okay? Can we go back? Guilt by association. This is a lovely fallacy I need you to remember. Guilt by association. Did we click on that? Okay. A guilt by association is when okay, for instance, this happens by Islamophobes all the time. Guilt by association, what they do to Muslims. Okay? A Muslim blew himself up in a crowded area and killed some people. You're a Muslim too, so you must be responsible. Collective punishment, basically. You have the same label, or you look the same, so you must share the same guilt. Guilt by association. Okay? See, this is a fallacy of reasoning. This is an actual fallacy of reasoning. See how philosophy helps so much? And how they don't practice it in the media? So, yes, ma'am. This is very similar to an ad hominem, but it's more for a group. But instead of saying you're wrong, what it's saying is that you are responsible, or you share the same beliefs, or you share the same consequences as this person or these group of people because you share the same characteristics. Okay, so I'll give you another example. Say a woman did something wrong. That means all women should be punished for it, or all women believe the same thing that that person believes. Okay, so you see, just because you're a woman. So in the same way they say about Muslims, they say because this Muslim did this, that means that because you share a label or you share a certain type of belief, that means that you are also responsible for that activity, without of course pointing out exactly what you're responsible or why you're responsible. It's just because of your label, or because you have a similar characteristic. Okay, so this is called a guilt by association fallacy. This is unfair.
Example that you gave just now, regarding the Hitler, this is almost similar as a
Yes, it is a form of ad hominem. That is a form of ad hominem. Okay, can we go back? Stop. Is ought. Can we go to the is ought fallacy, please? Thank you. Okay, example. Because somebody is doing something, or because something is the case, it's like something is happening, that means that one should or should not do it. So it doesn't give justification. Okay, so it is ought. So it is happening, so it ought to be the case. This happens a lot. So for example, he is torturing the cat, so he shouldn't do that. Okay, there's no argument here. It just assumes on the basis of the accusation, just on the assumption alone, that it's wrong. That's it. Okay, this actually occurs a lot. You need to look for it. It occurs quite a bit in certain places. And I'll give you another example of something related to this. Oh God. Can we go up, please? Stop. Mobile up. Stop. Oh, can we go to naturalistic fallacy? Thank you. The naturalistic fallacy is like this. Okay? Okay, since women are naturally capable of bearing and nursing children, they ought to be the primary caregivers of children. Okay? Since women have babies, they should be the ones to take care of the babies. Actually, this is a fallacy, because it doesn't explain anything. It just explains that what is happening, because she has a baby, she must take care of the baby. Okay? And it says because they're naturally capable of doing so. All right? But this is actually fallacious. Now, you can make the argument that women are better based on other evidence. Okay, that may be okay, like showing statistics that show that women are more capable in this form, and that it actually is better if they do it rather than men, based on other evidence. But you can't say just because they're naturally inclined to it that they are better at doing it. So for instance, people tend to be naturally inclined to want wealth, but that's not necessarily a good thing. it doesn't mean that we should go and become greedy as a result of that. So we're naturally inclined to have wealth, so should we become greedy and try to be as rich as possible and not care about anybody else? That's another way of saying the naturalistic fallacy. Some people say that it's natural to rape. Some people have actually made this argument that it's actually natural to rape.
Indian Prime Minister.
Okay. Did he say that? I didn't. That's pretty disgusting.
Narendra Modi.
He said
Okay.
that?
Yeah.
It's natural to rape. So he gave some.
Different words, Indian accent.
So
Yeah.
there's also something opposite of this, and I'm going to give you the other fallacy that's often used by Islamophobes, and we call it the moralistic fallacy. Okay, or sorry, the moralist fallacy. It's called the moralist fallacy. It's the opposite of this. All right, it's the moralist fallacy. It's saying what's happening, and it's very similar to the is-ought fallacy. Okay, what's happening in the legal system is what's actually happening in the country. Okay, but that's not true. For instance, in the United States, everyone has equal rights in the United States according to law, but are they treated equally? No. They say this about Muslim countries. Sharia is implemented in Saudi Arabia, so it must be like this across the board in Saudi Arabia. It must be exactly how it happens by the book, right? Or they say Malaysia is an Islamic country, so they must have Sharia implemented across the board because they say they're an Islamic country, right? That's another version, okay? Another way of saying that. It's a hasty generalization too. It's not appropriate, but it doesn't take into account what's happening on the ground, what's happening actually in the place that people are living. It's only looking at the legal codes and assuming from there that something must be happening in those countries, without understanding that sometimes people don't practice the law, some people don't implement it, sometimes there's contradictions, some people look for loopholes, things like this. Okay, that's actually a fallacy, so we have to be very careful. Unless we've lived somewhere or we've studied something, we shouldn't assume by their legal books or by what they say on TV that this is actually what's happening. We have to be very careful about that. And they do this to Muslim countries all the time.
Judging the book by its cover.
Basically, yes. That's a good way of putting it. They judge the book by its cover. So, can we go back, please? Okay, no true Scotsman. Yes. Now we're getting to my favorite ones. Okay. All right, a no true Scotsman is basically this. You'll hear this a lot from atheists. This is probably one of the only fallacies that atheists know about. Okay? Now, when you say to an atheist, well, say, okay, a Muslim, a terrorist does something bad, right? And they say, look at what Islam is like. And then you say to that person wasn't a true Muslim. That person was not a true Muslim. They were not following Islam appropriately. The atheist will respond, that's a no true Scotsman fallacy. What does that mean? It means that, so here's an example. All Scotsmen are loyal and brave. So Jones says, but MacDougall over there is a Scotsman, and he was arrested by his commanding officer for running from the enemy. And then, well, if that's right, it just shows that MacDougall wasn't a true Scotsman. Wasn't a true Scotsman, meaning that he wasn't a true Muslim, right? They weren't a true Muslim. Okay? So when we say that, it's actually a fallacy. It's actually a fallacy. Okay? Because the person claims to be Muslim. Okay, now, we can argue and say whether that person was following Islam appropriately, that we can say that's not Islamic. Okay, we can say that. But in terms of how they define themselves, okay, it's considered a fallacy to suggest, because what defines a Muslim is simply he follows the Quran, or he believes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he follows the 5 pillars of Islam, believes in Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, these basic attributes. So because of the definition, that's how they argue. But you can still claim that the person wasn't following Islam appropriately. They were not doing what Islam commands. And if somebody says that you're doing a no true Scotsman fallacy because you say that this is not Islam, then actually they're wrong. That's not a fallacy. And I'll tell you why. Because if Islam was just what everyone does, or what everyone thinks Islam is, then Islam wouldn't be anything. It would be everything. So you have to say, Islam is not this somewhere, because if you don't, then you can't define Islam, right? There's some people who don't pray. There's some people who think Islam allows ridiculous things. There's some people who believe Islam says you don't have to wear a hijab. There are a lot of people who think Islam is a lot of things. So if we included all of those in Islam, then Islam would be a big contradiction. So Islam has to be something. It has to be one thing, right? So it's okay to argue in that sense. Can we go back? Non sequitur. This is another good one, okay? Okay, non sequitur means, in logic, means does not follow. does not follow. What does that mean? It means that the premises do not follow to the conclusion. It means they do not equal the conclusion. Like 1 + 1 = 3. That doesn't make any sense. That's an error in math, but that would also be considered a non sequitur. Okay? So here's an example. Nuclear disarmament is a risk, but everything in life involves a risk. Every time you drive in a car, you are taking a risk. If you're willing to drive in a car, you should be willing to have disarmament. Doesn't follow though. It doesn't follow. What's the connection between the car and getting rid of nuclear weapons, for God's sake? He say it's the risk. But they're not similar in any way whatsoever, right? And there are many reasons why. But you'll see people making arguments like this, okay, all the time. All right? You have to be very careful. And while we're at it, I'm going to mention another fallacy. It's called the fallacy of equivocation. Equivocation. Okay? It's a fallacy of equivocation. And what that fallacy is when somebody uses a word in a different way in the same sentence or the same argument. Okay? So, I'm going to give you maybe 2 more and then we're going to finish up here. Can we go? No truth, non sequitur, one opposition, outright. Keep going. Stop, please. I don't want to do post hoc. Okay, up. Stop. Here we go. Poisoning the well, please. Poisoning the well is a form of ad hominem fallacy as well. And it's also very similar to the genetic fallacy. Okay? It's when you talk about somebody, all right? It's a preemptive attack on a person. So it's like an ad hominem before you give your argument, actually. You say, look, you go to everyone, you say, you shouldn't listen to this person. This person's a liar. Okay, don't listen to their arguments. They're lying to you, right? You see what I'm doing? So you're preemptively trying to sell your argument by first claiming that this person is wrong because of some flaw that they have. Okay, why would you trust that person? Remember what they did in this time?
If someone do that, how do you reply?
How do you respond? It's poisoning the well. It doesn't mean, just because this person has a flaw, doesn't mean that what they're saying is wrong. They could be making a good argument. They could be correct in their, just because they have bad character doesn't mean that the argument they're giving is incorrect. We should accept the argument based on its own standards, not because of the person's, immorality or the fact that they made a mistake or something else, or because they're not intelligent. Okay, this is wrong. Can we go back? Up. Stop. Okay, now up again. Stop. Smoke screen. Can we do smoke screen, please? Sorry. I actually want to get through more of these, but I don't think we're going to have time. Okay. All right. It's a form of the suppressed evidence fallacy, but it's even, it's basically what you do. You'll notice this about atheists, especially. Okay, this is very pertinent to them. What they do is that they try to give you a lot of information at once. Okay, like I mentioned, like all the Quran ayahs, they give you like 90, okay? What they're doing is they're trying to overload you. They're trying to give you so much. That's why I call it a smoke screen. You can't see beyond, it's so much there that you can't concentrate. And what they do is they try to refute you this way. So you offer too many details in order to either to be obscure or to cover up counter evidence. So because the person is focusing on all this information, they can't think of the right objections, okay, of what to do, they can't focus. And this is common. A lot of people they like to throw everything at you at once so they know you can't answer them, okay? Try to avoid doing this, and when you see it, point it out for what it is. So if somebody wants to argue with you, ask them first, look, can we focus on one thing at a time, please? And if they say, no, I want you to answer everything, then say, okay, I'm sorry, this is not, we're not going to do this. Okay.
We have seen this in Zakir Naik and Ahmadiyya debates.
Really?
Yeah. There was one Zakir Naik debate with Dr. William Campbell on science, Bible, science and Quran. Okay. Where William Campbell threw, I think, 35 or 40 arguments.
MashaAllah.
Zakir Naik replied, I think, only 20. And then he threw same arguments on Bible to Dr. William Campbell, and he had the headache of answering,
Yeah.
turning the
But-
table, but he didn't answer all.
But in both cases, it's actually inappropriate to do that. Because in fact, the reason for it is simply to overwhelm your opponent. It's just to overwhelm them. It's not to give the right answers or to give the right objections. It's to make sure that that person can't respond to
It was
you.
a debate.
Yeah. But even in debate,
One half of the topic, you see.
yeah.
The topic was to deal with both the holy books.
Yeah, I understand. But what I'm trying to say is that even in a formal debate session, you shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't throw 40 questions out or throw 40 objections. Because you know that within the time that you have, it's impossible to answer that. And that's why they're doing it.
Anishash through, I think, 200.
Ya Allah. That's wrong. Okay, so I would have told him, look, Yani, you answer them yourself. I'm not so, and I want to get to the red herring. Can we go back to that section? Smoke. Go to smoke screen, please. Can you type on red herring? Okay, this is another very important fallacy to remember. A red herring is a smelly fish that would distract even a bloodhound. Okay, it's a discretion that leads the reasoner off the track or of considering only relevant information. It's a form of the smokescreen fallacy. But you don't have to overwhelm your opponent. What you do sometimes is you'll throw in some information in there to distract the person. Okay, so say if we're talking about something in Islam, right? Say somebody objected to me about, say, Aisha, the issue that we talked about before. And as I'm discussing that with them, all of a sudden they throw in Hudud. They're like, okay, no, I want to talk about this. And you're not even finished your point. So instead of allowing you to give the evidences and to be able to counter them, they've switched the subject to get away from it. This is called a red herring. So when somebody does that to you, you said, I'm sorry, let me finish. We'll get to that point later. Okay? But actually a lot of people in debates, especially religious debates, when they see the atheist subjects, they switch with them. And then it gets into this lengthy, people write novels online in Facebook. I don't know if you notice this, when they argue with each other. And if you look at these religious arguments, it's all over the place. At one point, somebody's questioning something, then he answers, then he goes into something else, he answers, he keeps going. And nothing is ever resolved. So try to get away from that. Can we go back? And one more time? Okay. Okay. Straw man, we already know this? Okay, good. Subjectivist, syllogistic thing. Tukukwe, we know this? This is the one pointing the finger. You're a hypocrite, so you're wrong. That's actually a fallacy. Okay? Can't do that. Now, just because if somebody comes up to you and they don't pray, and they say you should pray, you can't say you're wrong because you're a hypocrite, because yes, you should pray. It doesn't mean that person, we do this a lot to our family members. We say, they come up to us and they tell us to do something, we say, well, you don't do it, right? To get away from it, right? But actually that's wrong, because that's actually fallacious. You can't say that. That doesn't mean that they're wrong. So we do that a lot, actually. That's one of the most common things that we do to each other. If we don't like to be corrected, we tell somebody of their own flaws. And then we try to get away from it. But in fact, you're still wrong. It doesn't matter. So when somebody does this to me, I say, okay, you're right. I'm a hypocrite or something. But now, does that mean that you're wrong? Because you're telling me, well, but you do this. Okay, so that means I'm right then. You do this then, right? So, wishful thinking, keep going? Okay, I think we're going to be good there. So, the you too fallacy is also it's just another word, another way of saying tukukwe, okay? Kui, excuse me.
False flag.
False what?
False flag.
False flag attack.
Yeah.
A false flag is not a fallacy, but it's a strategy. Yeah, it's a strategy of war. There are other.
False alarm.
Okay, I want you to actually write this website down. It's www.iep.utm, not UTM here. Okay, it's somewhere else. University of Michigan. UTM.edu. Okay. This website itself is probably the best online reference for all philosophical topics. If you find a philosophical word online, you can type it in the search engine. All the articles on this website are peer-reviewed by other philosophers. That means all the articles are written by philosophers and are critiqued by philosophers in the academic realm, not just random people like Wikipedia. Okay? And if you go to the fallacy section, Okay, you can look up all the individual fallacies if you want to study more, just in case you decide to look into this more in depth. The ones that I've given you are actually very basic. I learned these in Philosophy 101. The other ones that you saw on there, I will not get into detail because they take a lot more time. So I'm going to reserve the stage here now for question and answers if possible.